Thank you very much, Bally. And I should just mention, we will be having a bucket collection as you leave at the end, and we're going to split that in two ways equally. The money that people have paid for tickets or when you came in, that covers the cost of tonight's meeting comfortably, and the surplus of that will be going to help set up when we can officially set up a branch of the new party locally. So that money will be used for that. But we're also going to have a bucket collection at the end. If you've got your change, or we have got card readers, and we're going to split that 50-50 between Medical Action for Palestine that Bally's just mentioned and the Birmingham Bin Strikers Fund. Now we're going to introduce our penultimate speaker. Dave Nellist was a Labour MP from 1983 to 1992. He was kicked out for being too left-wing, to cut a long story short. Some things don't change. Since then, Dave stood as a socialist independent right back then in 1992, and he flipping nearly won. That was an incredible achievement back at that time when Labour wasn't half as discredited as it is now. Since then, Dave was for 14 years a socialist, an elected socialist councillor for St Michael's Ward of this city, and he's also he's the chair of the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition, which pioneered the standing of candidates on a big scale from a position to the left of Labour. Dave's also finally been very involved in trying to get trade unions and trade union activists to push their unions to disaffiliate from Labour and move towards the new party. Notably, having a meeting of an online meeting of some 1,300 trade unionists, which both Jeremy Corbyn and Zara spoke at. That was in July. So Dave's played a massive role in all these things. And welcome to Dave, the one, the only, the legendary Dave Nellist.
Well, I thank John for that introduction, which is certainly going to cost me a pint when this meeting's over. I came to Coventry in 1971. This city was then the richest working class city in the country. It was largely based on the strength of the trade unions. In the 1970s, 67% of all workers in Coventry were members of a trade union. Twice the national average. They were militant, they were well organised. The 1970s was also the time that this country was at its most equal. 2/3 of all the wealth this country made at that time, the GDP, went to the wages of working class people. Today it's barely half. It's a loss now of some £300 billion a year, which goes to wealth rather than wages. Now, that wasn't an accident. It's been a deliberate 50 years of attacks to reverse the gains that the working class made in the post-war period. Started with Margaret Thatcher, exporting the factories to countries where unions were weaker or wages were lower, turning the economy more to services and the profits of finance, widespread privatisation of key industries, cuts in public spending, particularly in housing, attacks on the unions through ever-tightening legislation. And none of that neoliberalism was challenged by the Prime Ministers who followed her. And then with the financial crash of 2008, triggered by the gambling and the speculation of that finance sector, the government borrowed and printed £400 billion to save the banks and their shareholders. It then opposed austerity to force ordinary working people to pay that money back. As a consequence, we have now had the worst decade for wages in this country since the Napoleonic Wars. And as Grace has already said, the Rowntree Foundation now are estimating in the millions the families who cannot buy essentials. 4.5 million, I think, as Grace said, who've borrowed money to pay bills or to pay for essential food. The TUC has estimated that without the austerity of the last 15 years holding wages back, if wages had continued as they were, growing in 2008, every worker in Britain today would be £10,000 a year better off. Instead, after 15 years of austerity, wages are 25% less than they would have been. But over that same 15 years, the 350 richest families in Britain, as tracked every year by the Sunday Times, are 140% more wealthy than they were at the beginning of our austerity. So is it any wonder, after 15 years of austerity, millions of working people have lost faith in establishment politicians and establishment parties? And without a working class challenge from the left, Farage is becoming the main electoral beneficiary. According to Ipsos, the polling organisation, Labour now is down to 22% support. The Tories are down to 14%. That's 36% for the two main establishment parties in Britain. Reform UK is on 34%, 2 points behind the combined support of Labour and the Tories. But there's also a huge enthusiasm for something different. A party that is anti-austerity and anti-war, that can really represent working people. Not just a party for them, but a party of them. One that's accountable. And I would argue, one whose representatives should live the same lives and on the same wages as the people they represent. In the words of John Maclean, and that's the revolutionary Scottish teacher during the First World War, not Bruce Willis in Die Hard, in the words of John Maclean, representatives who rise with their class, not out of it. Now, the 800,000 people who in July and August signed up to join what now we call your party, that number has its origins in that widening economic equality, that austerity. It is, as Jeremy once said, politics catching up with economics. And in the last 3 months, there have been hundreds of meetings like this, even bigger rallies in Liverpool and Manchester that Zara spoke at. But there's no guarantee that the anger of working people towards establishment parties and establishment politicians and their policies will automatically flow in a progressive direction. It's true. The first opinion polls in July, when Zara and Jeremy launched your party, even before it had a name, or politics, or structures, or campaigns, 10 to 18% of people said they'd vote for it. Particularly important amongst young voters, 18 to 24, it led all other parties at 34%. And more recently, according to the Times, amongst 16 and 17-year-olds, before a new party is promised to abolish tuition fees and restore grants for every student, before it promised to build homes for that half of all 18-year-olds who don't go to university but want independence and a life of their own, before a new party has promised to raise wages and to fully end zero-hour contracts, insecure and dead-end jobs, before the new party has identified a single policy to inspire the next generation of voters, 16 and 17-year-olds who were 10 and 11 when Jeremy was leader of the Labour Party, see this new party at least as an equal to the parties whose names they already know. But there's still that elephant. There's still that elephant in the room. The 10 to 18% support I mentioned earlier would come from existing voters voting for Labour, voting for Lib Dem, voting for the Greens, all of which would lose votes to a new Your Party. But the same polls show Reform UK largely untouched. Now, we know that the reform bubble can be burst. In 2015, when Farage led UKIP, he got 4 million votes in the general election of that year. 2 years later, in the general election of 2017, when Jeremy was leader and Labour was seen to have radical socialist policies that would materially change the lives of ordinary working people, new investment and an end to privatisation of health, new investment in education and in council house building, scrapping tuition fees and student debt, raising the minimum wage, welfare and pension benefits, restoring public ownership to water, gas, electricity, rail and Royal Mail, all the things that we could adopt as a starting point for the programme of the new Your Party. In 2017, Farage's vote fell to 600,000. 1 million people who voted Farage in 2015 voted Labour in 2017, when they saw a serious party challenging the inequality of this country. And we can do that again, but time isn't on our side. Next May's elections are a crucial stage in the fight to win mass support for a socialist alternative. 6 months ago, there were 2,000 council seats in England up for election, and Reform won 700. Next year, there's nearly twice as many seats, as well as elections for the Welsh Senate and the Scottish Parliament. Unchallenged, Reform could have 2,000 councillors in 6 months' time. In many places, London and Birmingham being the biggest examples, all councillors are up. For the next 4 years, there are no more elections, so what Reform gains next May, it holds to beyond the next general election, giving Farage's right-wing views, poisoning politics, a much wider platform than even he has at the moment. And in Coventry, all 54 seats are up next May. In Warwickshire, possibly Nuneaton and Berwick and Rugby. I say possibly because there's 66 councils in England who are part of a reorganisation strategy, and we still don't know which one of them are definitely going to have elections next May. But in Coventry, we must defend Grace's seat in Westwood and return her to the council. But we also need 53 other candidates to stand alongside her. Trade unionists, anti-cuts campaigners, anti-war campaigners, environmental campaigners, socialists, to fight against the annual cuts in our local services and for a plan to rebuild and restore the services that people need. So we need to come together and discuss a people's budget out of which we can get a manifesto over the next few weeks. That's a priority in Coventry and Warwickshire. But we need to link up with other Your Party branches and councillors and have a national struggle against this government to restore the money that's been stolen from our towns and cities. That will mark out a difference between us and all other parties, from the Tories and Reform who relish more cuts to local jobs and services, to others, even the Greens, who say with regret that they've got no choice but to make cuts. And for Labour, well, the best they can say, it's better their cuts than anybody else's, a policy of managed decline. Mary Cray, the MP for Coventry East, was on social media 2 weeks ago congratulating herself and the National Labour government for an additional £2 million a year in funding for the Willenhall area, but saying nothing about well over £100 million a year that the whole of Coventry has lost during the 15 years of austerity. I believe it's urgent that in order to head off the risk of Reform winning control of councils, we must have that campaign for the May elections, and then this party can be the one with fighting councils, even running councils up and down the country. Now, I said at the beginning, this was once the richest working class city in the country, but what do we have now? We have people sleeping in shop doorways and begging for money outside all our supermarkets. We've got parks and streets that are no longer regularly maintained. We've got hardly any youth clubs or youth workers. In fact, 60% of all council-run youth clubs have closed in the last decade. We've got 14 food banks in Coventry, but not enough social workers to help families long term, or the jobs and decent wages that can help people climb out of poverty. There's hardly any half-term or summer holiday activities for children at school. We've got increased charges on 16 to 18-year-olds with disabilities just to get on a bus to go to school. We've got a 50% increase in the charges for new residents living with dementia in council PFI homes. And we've got probably the most expensive PFI hospital in the whole of the country. Walsgrave Car Park makes £8 million a year profit from the staff and the families of the patients, and not a penny of that goes to the NHS. It all goes to the shareholders of PFI. PFI is a national scandal. We need a party to renationalise the NHS, drive out profit made from illness, extend ownership into pharmaceuticals and medical equipment manufacturers. We need to inspire people with socialist change. Now, what I want to finish on is this. I had hoped by tonight we would have had the founding documents of your party published, and there will be official meetings called in our area, including one here in Coventry, for discussion and amendments in the next few weeks. And in fact, they have actually been published in the last hour, so none of us have had the chance to properly read them. But they're going to go to a conference at the end of November, where 13,000 people chosen at random will debate out the policies, constitution and rules and plans for the next year. I have to say, I'm not a fan of drawing names out of a hat as to who should attend that conference, but given the time I haven't got left, perhaps leave that for discussion later on. But the one point I do want to say, that as John said in my introduction, the Socialist Party and the Trade Unions and Socialist Coalition are campaigning for the new York Party to have is trade unions and trade unionists at its heart. A party that represents the interests of the organised working class. What do we mean by that? Well, all those here in a union know it's not the union card alone in your wallet or purse that equals up the relationship between the employer and the employed. It's that the employer knows that if she or he doesn't deal fairly with workers, workers can act together to change that employer's mind. They can take industrial action, like the bin workers are doing in Birmingham. And politics is the same. It's not the individual, private or moral views that we hold that give us strength. It's the political organisation of our numbers. The working class in this country is 90% of the population. Not all of them are workers in the sense of actually being at work. Some can't work because of age or infirmity, or because the workplace is imperfectly adapted to enable them to do so. Some aren't in work because of caring responsibilities, but they're still part of the 90% majority in this country, that class in the population that doesn't own the means to make a profit, but has to sell its labour power in order to get a wage. 6.5 million of those are in trade unions. That's the largest voluntary organisations in this country. And we need to put them, their resources, their members, their structures and their power at the heart of this party. We need the fullest democracy in this new party, the ability for every voice to be heard. That means in individual local members' branches, every person having a voice and a vote, especially for candidates in local campaigns. Then when we get to a district level, and certainly at a regional and national level, we need a delegate structure to represent those members, but also to allow the affiliation of organisations such as trade unions, existing community groups such as the several that have grown up and been built recently around newly independent councillors, campaigns on housing such as Shack and Acorn, campaigns on the NHS and on the environment, and also a home for all socialists and their groups and their parties who bring experience and ideas in fighting to change society, something I know Zara wrote about in Tribune last week. So to finish, we live in the 6th richest country on the planet. Let's say every town and city there are people sleeping in shop doorways. House prices are 8 to 10 times the wage of a 20-year-old, pushing home ownership out of reach. Rents are uncapped. Landlords profit. Getting a degree at Coventry or Warwick University costs £90,000 in debt. Libraries are understaffed. NHS is overstretched, streets are dirty, parks are unkempt, there's hardly any youth clubs. And not one of those things is the fault of a few thousand desperate people coming here across the channel in rubber. I pinched one of Jeremy's aphorisms earlier. Let me now pinch one of Zara's. This unequal society, getting worse and worse for the majority of the population, is the fault of a few thousand people, the millionaires and the billionaires, coming and going not by rubber dinghy, but by private jet. So, let's change that narrative. Let's change the narrative that blames the most recent arrival to these shores and instead put the blame on the unfair, unequal, capitalist society that's organised for the benefit of the 1% of liquid millionaires, not the vast majority of the population. 400 years ago, in the English Civil War, the forerunners of the trade unions and of our socialist movement were the levellers and the diggers. They saw society as a pyramid, with the monarchy and the rich landowners at the top, the middle class who look after their interests a bit lower down, and at the base of that pyramid, the vast majority of ordinary people. And their slogan was, turn the world upside down. Put the millions really in charge, not the millionaires. Let's make your party the best possible version it can be, to end austerity, to end war, to build a new society that's fair and equal and has socialism at its heart. The establishment have poor parties. It's time for the working class to have one of their own.
Thank you very much, Dave.